Good afternoon, everyone. How are you doing? Good. It's kind of warm in here, but you'll forget all of that once you hear Dr. Julie Mead start talking. I'm Judy Bry from Reedsburg Area Concerned Citizens, and Julie is kind of close to my heart because she came to Reedsburg. I can't remember when it was. It was
2 years ago when the last budget was pending.
Yeah, the last budget cycle. And we did a public event for our city and our school district. And we had the best attendance of any event we've ever put on.
It was huge.
Yeah, we had about 100 people come to one of our elementary schools. And Dr. Mead spoke about the future of public education. Today, the topic of her presentation is the fight for public education. And those topics are really one and the same. If we don't fight for our public education, we won't have a future for public education. So let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Mead. Julie Fisher Mead is a professor in the Department of Educational Leadership and Policy Analysis at UW-Madison. Dr. Mead researches and writes about topics related to the legal aspects of education. Her research centers on legal issues related to special education and legal issues raised by various forms of school choice. Give us her a round of applause.
Thank you, and I think I need to do two things. First of all, I need to give you my Wisconsin roots. I was born in Edgerton, although I will confess that I do not recall living in Edgerton. My family was then on my grandparents' family farm, farming my grandparents' farm, and we moved when I was 3, so I actually don't remember living in Wisconsin, but I grew up in northwestern Illinois, so we always came to Wisconsin, lots and lots of relatives in Wisconsin, so Wisconsin has always been not only my birthplace, but kind of what I've always felt about home. I also want to confess to you that I have actually, I'm a professor, and kind of the modern equivalent of my blankie is, carrying technology with me to show you a presentation, but that doesn't appear to be in the cards today, so we're going to go old school, if you will. And what I decided to do is, you're all here for a purpose. I'm guessing there's things that you would like to learn and understand. What I was prepared to talk to you about was to help you to understand issues of privatization, both those kinds of voucher programs, both what is here in Wisconsin and how it works and how it intersects with school funding, as well as other forms of privatization that are happening in other parts of the country. A little bit about what's being proposed, at least currently in the federal budget, although we have currently what's called the skinny budget, which is just kind of the draft outline of the budget. And then just to kind of, and to talk about, independent charters and a variety of other things in relationship to public education. So that's kind of the landscape of where it was going to go. And rather than me walking you through things, why don't I just open it up and find out from you what it is I might be helpful in helping you to understand. Does anybody have a question? We'll start right there.
Yes. We want to know the difference between a charter school and a voucher school.
I'm happy to help you with that. So the question was, what's the difference between a charter and a voucher? And see, I'm going real old school. So I'll start with a charter. So a charter school, and a charter school is a creature of the state statute that created it. So a charter school in Wisconsin is not quite the same as a charter school in Minnesota or a charter school in Michigan or a charter school in Illinois. So you really have to truly understand, you have to dive into the details. But charter schools, by definition, have a couple of elements. Now this first one I'll tell you is actually contentious, believe it or not. But we usually talk about charter schools as being a special form of public schools. And they're a special form of public schools that in all jurisdictions that have them, and right now we're up to, well, Kentucky, I haven't checked to see that the governor signed that law yet, but Kentucky would be the newest one, which would make it 43 states. And charter schools are created with an authorizer. So each state says who can be the authorizer. And for the majority of states, school boards are the authorizer. In our state, most of our charter schools are authorized by school boards. But they can be authorized by what are often called charter school authorizers, or CSAs. And they can be whatever the state legislature says. Whoever state legislature gives that authority to, that's who gets to do it in that state. In our state, in addition to school boards, we have some special authorizers. We have the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, the Common Council of the City of Milwaukee, the Milwaukee Area Technical College, though it's never exercised its authority. Let's see, I'm not going to get them all because we have some new ones. We have the University of Wisconsin-Parkside, which originally had limited authority. In fact, those first three were our first three special authorizers, and they only originally had authority in the state, or excuse me, in the city of Milwaukee itself. Now, as of our last budget in 2015, their authority is now statewide. So they could put a charter school anywhere in the state, and there's also no limits on the number of charter schools that those three charter authorizers can authorize. So, and then we have several others. One of the newest ones is also UW system has some limited authority for some charter schools. Some of our native nations have some authority to charter schools. So we have a variety of special charter authorizers. Again, depending on the state, some states have charitable organizations can serve as charter school authorizers. It really does just depend on what state you're in. And the authorizer then creates a term contract with whomever was going to operate the school, and we call that the charter. And so that term contract says what different things the school is going to be held accountable to, right? And the idea behind it, the whole concept behind it, was frustration that public school boards there was too many politics about closing bad schools. That if a bad school was kind of allowed to exist because the politics, reared their heads whenever somebody tried to close that school. And then by creating this thing called a charter school, where you would be bound by a performance contract, and you'd have to come in and ask for renewal of that performance contract, that would somehow take the politics out of it and make it easier for folks to close schools. In point of fact, in the more than 20 years plus, we know that the same politics that rose up to keep the neighborhood school open rise up to keep the charter school open too. So yes, charter schools have closed, and the authorizer can both non-renew and under certain circumstances, depending on the state statute, revoke the charter, usually just for health and safety kinds of issues. The politics around closing them are just as thorny as they are for nearly any other school. So these authorizers, in this contract, they trade compliance with the contract for relief from state statutes and regulations. So what's really happening, I'm going to underline that. What's really happening is that they're trading compliance with the general, all the rules and regs that apply to all other public schools, for compliance with the particular. Now there are, again, depending on the state, that might not be a blanket release of compliance. It might be non-compliance with some. So for example, all the charter schools in Wisconsin have to have the same standards and benchmarks as all the other public schools in Wisconsin. And so there are certain things they're not relieved from, but other things they are. They have to, of course, when their term's up, ask for reauthorization. But because these are creatures of the state legislature, they can only relieve the charter school of compliance with the state laws, rules, and regulations, not federal law. And because they're public schools and they're recognized under the Elementary and Secondary Education Act as public schools, and in order to get federal money for charter schools, they have to be public schools, they have to comply with all federal public school laws. The reason I said this can actually be contentious is that we have had litigation where a charter school has claimed to essentially be private for some purposes and public for others. And if you want, you can send me an email and I'll send you a good article written by a friend. So that's charter schools. Now let me just quickly explain voucher schools and contrast. So voucher schools, and again, voucher schools, like charter schools, are creatures of the state legislatures that created them. So the voucher program, as spelled out in state law, dictates who's eligible to get a voucher, but also dictates what schools are eligible to participate in the voucher program. The biggest difference here is you have private schools. These are private schools under private control. And that also means that because they're a private school under private control, they decide whether to participate in the program, and they decide to what degree they want to participate in the program. So, for example, here in our state, we actually have four voucher programs. The very first one in the country, the Milwaukee Parental Choice Program, which is 1990. Then we added the Racine Parental Choice Program in 2011. In 2013, we added the statewide or Wisconsin Parental Choice Program, and in 2015, the Special Needs Scholarship Program. The first three, the MPCP, RPCP, and the WPCP, are all means tested for the first year of participation only. So to be eligible to participate in the Racine and the Milwaukee programs, the family has to have income of no more than 300% of the federal poverty level, which, interestingly enough, is more than the median income of a family living in the state of Wisconsin. But they only have to show that eligibility the first year of participation in the program. If their family's income, they win the lottery, they just get a better job, whatever happens, if their fortunes increase, they remain eligible to have that voucher at a private school until they graduate from high school. They don't have to reapply. The statewide program is a little stricter. It's currently, at least, 185% of the federal poverty level, again, only for the first year of entry into the program. If the family's funds increase after that, they remain. So the biggest difference is that charter schools are a specialized form of public schools formed by a contract with an authorizer. Voucher schools are private schools who elect participation in a state program. And what they have to do in terms of the conditions of that participation, again, depend on the state and what standards the state holds them to. Since we've talked about laws, here the state laws that govern private schools apply, but not the state laws that govern public schools. So whether or not they're held to the same accountability standards depends on what the state legislature wrote into the voucher plan as a condition of participation. And they may or may not have put anything in there. One other point, and then I'll take a couple questions here on this one. They, however, federal laws, actually most state laws, I should say federal and state laws, that apply to public schools either don't apply at all or apply differently. So, for example, the federal law, the Americans with Disabilities Act, applies to private schools, but they're held under they're governed under a different title of the law, Title III, which does not hold them to the same standard. It only requires that they make accommodations, and they don't have to provide special education and related services that public schools do or public charter schools do. Okay, you had a follow-up?
Yes, I have a follow-up. So why did charter schools start? Was that because that they wanted to take some of the responsibility or authority away from the local level of the school board?
Well, no, because
Or
the first charter school law was in Minnesota. And actually, some of the early charter school laws, the idea was, actually, in some cases, in the AFT, the American Federation of Teachers, was championing it, Schenker, for example. But part of the thinking was that this would create some innovation, a new mechanism to create some innovation for schools. The majority of early charter schools were all still controlled by school boards as the charter authorizer. But the idea was to kind of play around with this idea of regulatory relief in exchange for autonomy and accountability to the contract. And to see whether or not that regulatory relief actually created better schools, and the idea that if a group of teachers who had an idea or somebody else had an idea to start the school, we might get these new innovative programs. In the years that have followed, although there are examples of that happening, we do know that the majority of charter schools have an analog in, kind of a traditional public schools, and they often are not very different than our traditional public schools.
So are they thinking of the charter school of maybe having a certain like science program?
Right, some have a curricular focus, exactly. Or a different, a Montessori school, for example, or something like that. Right. But again, it depends on the authorizer and what standards the authorizer has for handing out the charter in the first place. So if the authorizer is not going to hold them to a standard to demonstrate innovation, then they don't have to demonstrate innovation.
But the voucher can have the same thing, where they would have a special school that would be a Montessori school or a
They
science
could, but these
program
are, voucher schools are, they're just private schools. So they could be anything that anybody wants a private school to be. Religious or non-religious, depending on the state that you're in. Most voucher programs use
Or
both.
maybe get the same monies as the charter or the public schools. So the public
Not
schools
quite,
get the same amount
not
of money.
quite. So again, depends on what your state law says, how much the voucher is worth, and whether it is for the full satisfaction of tuition or just pays for a portion of tuition. That's why it starts to get, depends on what state you're in and all that kind of thing. To give you an example, most charters in Wisconsin that are chartered by the school district, how much the charter school gets depends on the negotiation between the school district as its authorizer. Our independent charter schools, by statute, this year, got 1,000, if my memory serves, and don't hold me to having a number off, but that's about right. About $8,188 per child in state aid for an independent charter school, one that's not chartered by a school board. The voucher programs is $7,969, I think, for grades 9 to 12, and $7,323, I'm pretty sure, grades K through 8.
So
And that's state aid.
So that doesn't make any difference what location they are? whether
Doesn't
they're
matter where they are.
Wisconsin,
No.
Northern Wisconsin,
No.
they're gonna get 8,188 or.
Right.
7,000.
Right. Doesn't matter.
Okay. So then, what do public school students get? I heard we get less than the other two. How rude.
I gotta push this aside here. Come here. So, this is where we have a lot of complexity in our system, which, sometimes I think they do that on purpose to make it harder for us to understand, harder to
Right.
So let me give you a little primer. I can't tell you how much public schools get because we have this big formula that figures out how much public schools get. In part, it's locked in at what was being spent in 1993, because that was our baseline year, and then we created this thing called revenue limits in 1994. And then, of course, it also depends on referendums that you may have had in your community. But in general, here's a little primer. In general, and I use the metaphor of a box. So in general, most school aid comes in the form of what we call state equalization aid. And that state equalization aid is designed to recognize that different communities have different abilities to fund their own schools, right? Now, using my metaphor of the box here, this box is filled with two kinds of money. and the box must be full. Okay? 2 kinds of money, the box must be full. With apologies to the marketers who created the orange money commercials. We'll do orange money here. So the 2 kinds are state aid, which of course doesn't come out of magic. It comes from taxes collected from the state, right, through income taxes and otherwise. And then the other kind is through local property taxes. Now remember that the box has to be full. So the formula is set up such that if you're a property rich district where you have large property values, again, just arithmetic says if you multiply a big number, because you're property rich, by a small taxation number, you still get a big number, right? That's arithmetic. And so in recognition of that, the line between the 2 kinds of money, because again, box is always full, so because they can create more local property taxes, they would get less state aid down here. Opposite, of course, is if you're in a district that's property poor, again, arithmetic is not your friend. Even if you tax yourself at a higher rate, arithmetic times, a big number times a small number is still going to end up being not enough money. And so you get more state aid, right? So that proportion shifts as a way to equalize. So the way vouchers works, this is where it gets really goofy. Oh, and by the way, one thing to watch, and what's happening right now is according to the governor's proposed budget for the next biennium, he has frozen the revenue limits. He's making now of course what the legislature might do with it might change, but right now the proposal is to have no change in the revenue limits. If there's no change in the revenue limits, that means no more money through this equalization aid formula. Now he is proposing a new amount of money in what's called a special aid. Beginning in about 2011, the legislature wanted to make sure that every school district got some money, and they knew if they added more money to this formula, some districts would get some and other districts would not. And so they created what it was called special student aid, or a special per pupil aid that is outside the formula. And so all of the additional monies that the governor is proposing are outside the formula. And an extra $200 in the first year, and then on top of that $200, another $204 in the second year, for a total over the biennium of $404 more per kid. But not in the formula. So you can understand what that's going to do, right? Everybody's going to get money, but it's also going to have a disequalizing effect. In other words, the poor districts are going to be poorer, and the rich districts are going to be richer. And the only way to get a bigger box, if you will, to get more money, is either by having the legislature increase the limit. We're giving you bigger money, and then we're going to pour more money in to fill up the space, because the box always has to be full. Or for school boards to go to referendum in a school district and say, please, may we have more money. Now the way we fund both of these things now is what sometimes is called a pass-through model. And so what they do is whatever state aid is coming to your district, they multiply and take off the top any kids who are in independent charter schools, and they take off the top any kids who are in voucher schools. What that means then is, in order to know the effect on your local school board, school district, you have to know 3 numbers. What is your local revenue limit? Right? Then we know the voucher amount. That one's a given. And we'll just use, because it's easier math, I'll use $8,000, right, of the voucher. And then you have to know how much money you're going to get in state aid. Now what the legislators were banking on, or what they were hoping was, is that the difference between these 2 numbers would make up for the difference between these 2 numbers, which may or may not be true. Because we can count the kids on vouchers or count the kids in the independent charters on our rolls when we do membership, right? That's how we figure this all out. That's part of the formula, counting all the kids. But we can only levy up to the amount of the voucher. So you can levy up to the amount of the voucher, not the amount that you levy for the kids in public schools. So they're hoping that this difference will take care of that and it'll be a wash. But for many districts, this difference is bigger than that difference. And any difference, of course, see this, I told you this gets complicated. When this any difference, this is essentially the local subsidy of the voucher. Any difference between the state aid and the voucher is a local subsidy. They're hoping it'll be paid for right here, but it may not be. But of course, that's only true if you got to count that kid last year. Because the way we fund public schools is by counting a rolling 3-year average of the 3 past years' enrollment. The way we fund voucher schools is how many kids show up at their door this year. You can already see that there's a little problem there, right? And so for those kids, and the majority, especially in the statewide voucher program, were not kids who we call sector switchers, who started in public school and switched to private school. The majority of kids, especially in the statewide voucher program, were kids who were already attending the private schools. We merely now pick up the tab. So before, either their parents paid tuition or a scholarship paid tuition, now the public is paying the tuition. And so for those kids, we never levied this amount for them anyway, so there is no savings, right? Because we never levied for them. So you've always got that subsidy, then that local subsidy. So this becomes, that difference is the local share of the voucher. And that tells you one way that the way we're currently doing vouchers affects local property taxes. Because for every new kid that we bring under the public umbrella, right, we're having to levy more to fill up those kids. The other way that it affects local property taxes is what I call the divisor dividend problem. Because we're bringing more kids, those kids who are currently in private schools, about 90,000 of them, thereabouts. We're trying to they're bringing them under public funding, but they're not adding more money to the pot of money that's being spent for that purpose. So again, math tells you if you're bringing more people in, right, a bigger divisor, but the pot of money stays the same, everybody gets a smaller slice. But, and I'm going to mix metaphors here, but imagine it's kind of like a pizza party, but the pizza party is rigged a little differently. So imagine you've got some friends over, there's 4 of you, you order a pizza, and between the time you ordered the pizza and when the pizza arrived, 3 more friends show up. Well, you would think, well, now I just divide my pizza into 7 equal parts and all is good, yeah? No. Because the way this is set up, these kids have a guaranteed slice, $8,188, and they get their slice first.
Right.
Then these kids have a guaranteed slice, depending on the grade level, and they get their slice second. So if there's any arithmetic kind of fixing to happen, that's only on the kids who are in public schools, because they don't get a guaranteed slice of state aid.
Why is that? That's wrong.
Why is that? Because our state legislature set it up that way.
And when do they do that?
Our last biennium budget.
Better question though is why do 70-some% of the people in the state support choice school? That,
Right.
It's unfathomable to me.
Well, actually, if you saw the recent Marquette poll, the majority of folks support public education to a greater degree, and our national polling shows that the majority of people still oppose vouchers, not support them. Especially when they understand that vouchers will take away money
You mean
from
that
public
Tom
schools.
Tiffany lied to me?
I don't know what Tom Tiffany was. I don't know what he was citing.
My question is on this idea of choice.
Yeah.
You just mentioned that. If you have thoughts on that, that's the argument you keep getting thrown at us, right? That people should be able to make the choice to go with school they want to go to, but it seems like that's a hidden argument. That's not really true. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Okay, so there's two things. One, the predominant choice is by the choice of the school. The school gets to choose to participate, how much they participate, and of course, since they get to decide what kinds of programs and opportunities they have, they kind of get to decide what kind of kids they're going to keep, right? And because they don't have the same rules and regulations, they can send some kids back. So school choice is really school choice more than parental choice.
Well, I think
But then if you go, but even unpacking that idea of parental choice, I think what we have to remember is, well, yes, I mean, who doesn't like choices? Everybody likes choices. But have you ever stood in the drugstore and looked at all that going, how do I figure this out, right? There's 14 different things for my headache. I'm going to figure out which one is for my headache. And this may have given you one. But my point is, when you have those choices, the idea is that one, there's an equal playing field, that they're relatively the same, and that you have sufficient information to vet or understand those. That may or may not be true in a voucher program, depending on how they set it up. The other thing that I would say with that, actually my colleague Gloria Ladson-Billings always says, we don't get choices in public services. You don't say, well, you know, I really want that road to go over there, not over here, because this would be really easier for me. You know, you don't get everything you want when it's a public service. You know, the example she uses is, you know, I want my garbage day to be Monday. Because I like to entertain on the weekend, and then everything gets cleaned up, but her garbage day is Thursday. So are we going to now create a voucher so she can go out and get new garbage? And not come, I mean, so we start to create inefficiencies in the issue. But it's a very seductive argument. I would argue what many of you probably didn't hear me at lunch, but one of the things that I talk about is, or trying to talk about, is this idea of publicness. That publicness is not just public funding. That's part of it. That's what we talked about here. But there's a lot more to publicness that is the cost of that choice. And are we really willing to essentially trade publicness for a subsidy of all private choices? Because the other elements of publicness are public purpose. Education serves a public purpose in order to educate us for democracy so that this thing works. If we're not informed voters, this doesn't work, right? So public purpose is important. Public access. If you were to take my school law class, or actually I was giggling before, because that's the updated Wisconsin school laws. I was looking to see how updated it was. But at any rate, one of the laws in there is WEN 1823, which is non-discrimination, Pupil Non-Discrimination Act. It prohibits discrimination on the basis of a whole host of things, including, we were the first state in the nation to explicitly protect kids on the basis of sexual orientation. Private schools don't have to comply with that act, and they don't have to comply in the same way with the federal rules around discrimination on the basis of disability or language learning or any of those kinds of things. So we have, and that one of the studies that I recently did was to look at what is the non-discrimination language in voucher programs across the country. Even some, although ours is pretty good on this point, allow religious discrimination. So public access, we're going to be having some schools that are very, very homogeneous, right? And we're going to be paying, we're going to be supporting public schools that are not providing public access. Fun fact for you, did you know that 22 of the 121 schools that participate in the voucher program in Milwaukee are 100% voucher enrolled? Let that sink in for a minute. 22 schools are funded 100% by public money, but they're still private schools. Another 50 are 90 to 99.9% voucher enrolled. The average voucher enrollment of a school participating in the Milwaukee program is over 80%. 80% of those kids are funded by the public, but they're still a private school. That means that we are funding schools that are not providing access to every kid. Because they don't have to serve kids with disabilities. They can if they want to. They don't have to serve kids who are learning English. They can if they want to. But as you all know, there's a big difference between having to do something and having the discretion to do something, right? Let me get two more aspects of publicness out here, and then we'll keep talking. So the other one then is public accountability to communities. We're standing in a public school right now, built with public tax dollars. If people want to go to their public school board and ask for things to change, they can do that. They can hold that school board accountable. When we're talking even about charters, when those charter schools are authorized by a non-school board entity, the ability of the public to hold that school or that authorizer accountable vanishes, right? And as more and more of our funds go to either independent charter schools or voucher schools, of course the voter has no impact at all on what happens in that private school, unless you count whatever the rules are. We have an impact in the rules that are set up for the voucher schools. And if I traced as a project once all the changes in the Milwaukee Parental Choice Program over 20 years. It started with just a few paragraphs, and now it's many, many pages. But a lot of those, if you look at where they came after high-profile scandals. Literally, somebody bought Cadillacs with the money. Didn't think that was okay, so then they put in an audit provision. So, you can see all of that kind of thing happening. So public accountability to communities gets lost under both of these privatized systems. And then the last one is public curriculum. We decide collectively what it means to be educated. And I'll give you a silly example maybe from my youth, a long time ago. So I'm from a family of 8. And my next oldest sibling is 5 years older. And between Don and I, calculators happened. And so Don and my 5 older sisters learned how to use a slide rule. I did not. My dad thought my education was going to hell in a handbasket because I didn't learn how to use a slide rule. Of course, that's silly now. Does anybody even know what one is? Have one anymore? Nobody uses a slide rule anymore. You still have one? But even think about computer literacy. Would we consider somebody educated without computer literacy these days? Probably not. Private schools, now again, legislatures who created the voucher system could make as a condition of participation a host of conditions, but they haven't. So they could say you have to have the same stuff, but they haven't. They have said that you have to, abide by what the private school is. They do say that our state law does require them to at least be offered the same test, but the parents can opt them out of the test if they don't want them to take it. But they have to be offered the same test, which does create some press to adopt the same curriculum standards. So I give our legislators credit where credit's due there. But otherwise, often what happens in the difference is that the private school has to meet whatever standards that the state says they have to meet to be a private school, which usually means providing reading, writing, arithmetic, science, and social studies in those buckets. But what they teach under those things is up to the school. And again, our ability to influence the fact that a private school that's funded with our tax dollars may be teaching that evolution is a hoax, for example. We don't have any say in that, right? So, what's the cost of that choice? Publicness is the cost of that choice. And like anything, even if you think, well, okay, I'm willing to pay that, then I think you do come back to money. Can we afford to fund 2 separate systems? One that we have access and accountability over, and one that we, at least so far, have limited accountability over. Right there in the middle, and then we'll keep going.
Right.
You're watching my time for me, aren't you?
Yes.
Thank
I
you.
just wanted to respond to the question about choice, because my problem has always been they've stolen the best vocabulary. And so everybody thinks choice is a great idea.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna be testifying in Platteville in front of the Joint Finance Committee on April 3rd.
Thank you.
Oh, by the way, before I forget, because Heather, or Barname, asked me to mention to all of you that the Wisconsin Public Education Network, if you Google them, you'll find they've created a whole repository of materials that will help you to testify before the Joint Finance Committee hearings. And they've also listed all the hearings, when they are, where they are, to help you. So just wanted to make sure that I did that and get that out. Okay, go.
Yeah, I'll make it fast, because what I feel is that 800,000 children in this state
Right.
choose their public school. That's the choice.
Yes.
That's the choice. We're only talking about a small minority. And so I want to steal that word back, and I want to apply it to the hundreds of thousands of children who choose their public school.
I think you're right, and I think I've always said that part of our problem is that all of these arguments, because they get complex, just don't lend themselves to a bumper sticker.
No.
If we could come up with a good bumper sticker, we'd be all set. But, a voucher in every backpack. Choice is good. Those are easy bumper stickers, but our stuff is a lot harder. But I think what we do, and why I started talking about this, is that, and by the way, if you were in the session that talked about renaming and messaging, some school choice proponents have now started calling public schools government schools. As a way to try to rebrand and make it naughty. But again, didn't we believe Lincoln? I mean, Lincoln, government of, by, and for the people. Don't we believe it? I think we gotta believe it. So this publicness, I think, are those things that we can start talking about, that framing and reframing, because there's, at least as currently constructed, those things are all diminished, if not completely lost, in a voucherized system. And by the way, that means whenever you talk about accountability shifting, that means that your vote, your franchise, just got diminished. Because your ability, and by the way, we spent this year $247 million on our voucher programs. $247 million.
Is that Wisconsin?
That's Wisconsin only for our voucher programs. Because one of the things that happens, of course, is once you give it away, once you give that publicness away, getting it back is going to be very, very difficult. And one of my arguments, one of my complaints is that we have never once in this state adopted any of the voucher programs that we have or any of the privatization schemes we have as a standalone, transparent bill where you and I can go to our legislature and say, yes, this is fabulous, or no, this is not, or yes, I like it, but only if you do it this way. We haven't been able to do that because every single solitary time it's either been in a huge omnibus budget or omnibus bill or the actual budget bill. Which means that our legislatures get one vote, up or down, for everything state government does. And the only way to vote no on the voucher program would be to vote no on the whole budget. Roads, prisons, parks, the whole kit and caboodle. And I personally, I don't know, maybe I'm alone in this, but personally, I think we should be able to have an up or down vote on that issue alone. And to give an example of the state special needs scholarship program, when it was a standalone bill, it was defeated at least twice in my memory, maybe even a third time. And so they just rolled it into the last budget bill, and then we didn't get, literally in the middle of the night, and we didn't get to have any input whatsoever.
And who did that?
Who did that?
Yeah, I know who did it. I want you to say that loud.
The members of the Joint Finance Committee, because Governor Walker didn't even propose that. The members of the Joint Finance Committee added that into the budget in the middle of the night when they were adding amendments, and then it survived the rest of the process. Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, you mentioned Lincoln. I think this Lincoln is kind of a pivot here. he's developed some respect after the Civil War. But potentially, we're gonna lose Lincoln and all this stuff. If you take the heart of the right-wing machine, focus on the ultra money interests in that right-wing machine, the loss of public schools is allowed the fact that corporate interest wants some slavery available. In fact, they'd like probably up to half the population available for slavery. And killing the public schools is the way that we want to go to get that. So this is going to be the loss of Lincoln.
Well, I think, the one thing that I would say is that, some of the ideological arguments are that it shrinks government, it gets government out of it, right, because parents are choosing. But it gets government out of it, but it also gets government out of it, and what I was trying to say over your chili, is that then shifts the onus to the parents. Now the parents have to shoulder all of that burden of accountability instead of the collective accountability. And so instead of going and rattling, and saying to our legislators, do things differently, they will be able to say, but we gave you choice. What's your complaint? If you don't like what you chose, choose again, right? And that I think is a concern of mine. I will mention also, if you want to Google CNBC, I think in 2012, if you Google charter schools and investment, you'll find this clip that this hedge fund manager for a for-profit charter management organization arguing that you should invest in charters, this charter school management, for-profit charter school management organization to get more money in your pocket, right? And he talks about it being recession-proof because of the annual influx of public money. So that part of it is getting into that. One estimate I saw was 500 billion, another was 600 billion enterprise that is public education. Go ahead. I've been waiting a long time.
The number of voucher schools in Wisconsin and the percentage of those that are religious-based, and about that K-12, the one they advertise on TV, the homeschool computer.
Yeah.
Is that voucher?
The one that they're at, the Connections Academy that they advertise on TV, the one that you've probably seen, that's a charter school in Wisconsin.
Okay.
So it's in the second one, but it's privately, the vendor is a for-profit vendor.
Okay.
Not all of them, we have a couple different ones, but I think the one you're referring to is a for-profit vendor. She asked about the number and the percentage that are religious. The majority are religious. The last numbers I saw, now I haven't looked, they just released the new list, which has increased, we're up to 300 schools statewide, I believe. And I haven't looked at the new list yet, I just saw the number. But the last list I looked at, on the statewide program, the one that would affect here, all the schools that participated were religious. They have some non-religious schools in the Milwaukee area, but not religious private schools. But even there, the majority of schools and all the programs that participate are religious schools.
How many are for-profit? How many for-profit of these schools do we have?
I don't know. I mean, we do have in our charter schools, most of the charter schools in Wisconsin are authorized by school boards and are not-for-profit. By definition, they have to be not-for-profit. This, again, gets kind of complicated. So the person that holds the charter, the entity that holds the charter is not-for-profit, but then they contract with a for-profit vendor to provide services or do delivery. So even though on paper it looks like the nonprofit organization holds the charter, it's a for-profit entity who's actually doing things. The majority of the for-profit ones, as you can imagine, are in the Milwaukee area, or that area. Most of that have for-profit affiliations, and actually fairly, in comparison to some other states, because up until now we've had very few non-school board authorizers, we also have very few for-profit charters. Now, how many of the voucher schools consider themselves not-for-profit or for-profit, I don't know. Yeah, I just don't know the answer to that.
Oh, I have a spreadsheet that someone did in our area that shows what all public schools get for state aid compared to what private schools get. And some public schools get nothing because they're property rich.
Right.
And it doesn't matter how poor, and the poor, he could explain it better. He's here, I can't remember his name, but he'll go into the districts that are getting like 40% free lunches because they're poverty stricken, but they get no help. I don't know if anybody else has seen it, but.
Well, that's because it's not income, it's property based. So you
Yeah.
could have an
Yeah.
area with,
Yeah.
you know, expensive farms or vacation homes or any of those kinds of things.
Mhm.
And that makes the district property rich, even though the people who are paying the taxes are not. So that's why that happens. But again, to be fair, if we're gonna hold everything, be fair, remember that we're only talking about part of the money that comes into the system, the state aid part, not what they're levying. And you're absolutely right. There are a number of districts that get no state aid because of the wealth. And in that case, if they have a child who is attending a private school with a voucher, it would more likely be that than this, because right now we have very few independent charters, but that could happen. Then if you will, the local share, because this difference, this goes all the way down here, the local share is the whole amount. They have to fund the whole amount.
Just two quick things. I work in a public school district, so I was wondering if people are aware that if your child is going to a public school in Reedsburg, for example, and you're not particularly satisfied with it for some reason, or another public school district nearby has some program that you really like, maybe like they have a swimming pool, and so they have a swim team you'd like, you can apply.
Yes.
So you can do school choice within public school districts.
Yeah, statewide open
So that's why I
enrollment.
don't even like to use the word school choice. I avoid that terminology, like Sheila said too, because I think of it that way, that within public schools we have choices. And we're really not talking about that,
No,
that
we have a
choice.
lot. We have a lot of public school choice in Wisconsin. Actually, a longer list of public school choice than of
Yes.
private school choice.
Yes, and in Reedsburg, I wanted to mention, we have 2 parochial schools in town, and this is how it works. So one of them has opted to go for the voucher, has said, we want this money, St. Peter's Lutheran Church and School in Reedsburg. So you could have a child, and now it's a little different, your child has to enter the system in order to get the voucher at the
There are some
beginning?
some cut points, but one of them is the beginning, and then there's a grade change at times. So it's not just once during their.
Oh, it's not just once. Well, anyway, but conceivably, your child could go to preschool at St. Peter's Lutheran Church through grade 8, totally on taxpayer money.
Yes.
They don't have to pay a dime, and it's religious education that they're getting totally. So I want people to get a picture of that. I wrote a letter to the editor because I was like, people know that right here in Reedsburg, this,
Yeah.
and actually.
Lady in pink here toward the front.
I'm curious about your opinion, because it seems like very purposeful destruction of public education, okay? I mean, it's subtle and it's creeping, but it's purposeful. So what do you think the motivation to destroy public education is? What would be, I'm sure it's multidimensional, but what would be your opinion about why we're in this picture?
I'm tempted to say you have to ask those people who champion them, but I think the honest answer in my view, and kind of looking over all the different things, and this is just, my Julie Mead's opinion, having studied this for a long time, is that there are 2 overriding things. One, in most states, including our own, the #1 state expenditure is public education. So if you shrink that somehow, if you get those costs down, you have kind of by definition made state government smaller, and that is a benefit of itself. I do think that there are a number of people who really think that choice is its own benefit, that is a good thing, and that, kind of what's the big deal? They don't see the potential for destruction of public education. And I don't think that they're doing it to destroy public education, they're doing it to give a benefit to everybody. But, make no mistake about it, what you're doing when you're creating a voucher is you're making a new entitlement program. I think that's kind of ironic, just saying. But that's what you're doing. You're making a new entitlement program. All the way in the back, and then the gentleman over here.
I'll be super quick. I want to be like you. Went to Catholic school, K through, way into my master's degree. My mother said, when I asked her why it was fair for her to have to pay tuition and the kids across the street went to public school, she said, well, because we want to keep control of our Catholic school. And as soon as the state gives you money, they're going to be able to tell you what to do. She was wrong about that. The second thing she said was...
she's right. It's just that we have not elected to hold them accountable.
Exactly. But the second thing she said was, if that happens, then people like me who raise chickens to sell eggs so I can pay your tuition, they're going to let the state pay for that. And the recent study says that parishes all over certain parts of the state are closing because the people are not giving to the church because they figure they don't need to support the school. Now that's a fact. That's what's happening, where they're in financial distress. But on a different point, but equally important, I live in the 12th Senate District. There is not one charter school or voucher school in that entire huge district. Not one. And Tom Tiffany, who is our senator, is a leading proponent on the finance committee for voucher schools. Now you can go to a website and you can find out where Tom Tiffany gets his campaign money from. And guess who funds a lot of what he wants to do? It's the Bradley Foundation, which is number one, the Betsy DeVos wing of the Republican Party that is doing this. So I do think you're right. Some people are sincere, but I do think there's also a nefarious reason why this happened. It's money.
So I want to thank you because you exemplify the Wisconsin idea.
So I'm here.
A faculty member of the University of Wisconsin, it is incumbent upon faculty to share what they know with the public so that we can be better informed decisions to positively affect our own lives and the lives of our community. That is not an easy job.
That was very kind of you. And to be very frank and open, we were in one of those sessions with Kathy Kramer. She said, I'm actually a shy person. I would never have called myself shy. That's my siblings. But, I was a pretty comfortable little academic doing my academic stuff. And kind of get myself out here doing these kinds of things is a bit out of my comfort zone, but the Wisconsin idea says I have to do it. So
and I'm grateful.
Yeah. And by the way, I have been up to Ashland. I've been to Eau Claire at least 3 times. I've been to Wausau, Stevens Point. I've been everywhere. I've been to Kenosha, Reedsburg, Mineral Point, a couple other places.
And I hope they all appreciate you.
You know what? People are so kind. They are so kind. So yes, they have.
Yeah, the question you asked about access before and the 800,000 people choosing, has this been challenged legally in terms of discrimination when you're giving state money and federal money to, in contradiction to the 14th and local amendment?
Well, so
what's the history on that?
Yes, well, I can give you a law review article that's coming out that I just wrote on that issue.
Just the bottom line, how come it hasn't been, or has it been?
Well, so the voucher program has been challenged twice in the state of Wisconsin. First on just, is it okay to have these private schools? This was Davis versus Grover in 1992 was the first one. And at that time, the program was really small and had a lot of controls on it. It was actually called experimental, the Milwaukee program. And the court said it was permissible because there was no evidence and nobody made the argument that the voucher program interfered with the state's delivery of public education. And because they were meeting their constitutional obligation to do public education, this was an extra thing. And they can do as many extra things as they want to as long as they're doing this first. My argument in my law review article is I'm not sure we can make that argument that they're doing this yet. So I think that that's an issue. The second one was a church-state issue that was in 1998, which said, and both of those, the problem that we both of those, as a legal theory, are dependent on what's called a state actor, because they're prohibitions on government, right? So there are prohibitions on government. But the legal theory that first our Supreme Court, or I should say 4 members of our 7-member court, and then 5 members of U.S. Supreme Court in 2002, said because I hand the voucher to you, and you are a private person, and you decide where to enroll your child, the decision maker is a private person, not the government, and that's why it doesn't violate church and state.
If a person ever got a voucher, prohibited from going into a voucher school, that might be a...
Well, you know, we argue that there are some discrimination things that are a problem, and then the other one that I argue is that education clause one, that you've got to do your homework, make public schools worth choosing before you can do the other. Thank you, Dr. Mead. We're over